Any Bill Cosby fans? Yeah. I love Bill Cosby. He's awesome. Well, you know, he's the one who says, a word to the wise ain't necessary. It's the stupid that need advice. And I heard somewhere, and I don't know, it sounds like something from Forrest Gump, stupid is, stupid does. And then I also remember growing up hearing the statement, you can't fix stupid. I've made a lot of dumb mistakes in my life, and I don't need a show of hands, but I'm going to guess that you have made dumb mistakes. Like you look in the mirror, you answer the cell phone call, and you say, boy, that was stupid. And I would say nearly every time we find ourselves in that situation, we could say, I didn't act very wisely. So where do we find wisdom? Where do we find true wisdom at? That ability to apply the truth, the knowledge, to have wisdom, because there are a lot of different options out there. So that's why I'm starting a new series today, Ears to Hear. Having ears to hear. It's all about applying wisdom. So before I talk about some of the options out there where we can find wisdom, I want to share a story with you. Anybody familiar with the name Susan Butcher? Oh, excellent. No one knows about Susan Butcher. She, and I may not pronounce it right because I don't always pronounce words right, but the Iditarod, is that right? Yeah, the Iditarod. She was a musher, yeah. And so it goes from Anchorage to Nome, right? It's about 1,150 miles. Takes them about 2 weeks. A real challenge. You know, at night, it can drop down easily, sometimes lower, but easily to 40 below zero. And so they've got to plan out their route. They put a cache of food. It's a really grueling experience. So Susan Butcher, she's really in love with animals. I think she was a veterinary tech for her occupation when she wasn't a musher. And so she's going to try something different. She knew all the facts. That's important. She knew all the facts about the race. The distance, the route. She knew all the facts. She had all the same information as the rest of the teams. But she was going to try something different. And so she began, and the way the story goes, is to train the dogs like marathon runners. Now, I don't know what all that means, but that's how she began to train them. And so her first time to try this new method went something like this. She was going to race the dogs differently than what people had always done. And always, you would run your dogs for 10 to 12 hours, and then sleep for 10 to 12 hours and get up and do it again. But she was going to do something different. And so she was going to only race for 4 to 6 hours, let the dogs race for 2 hours, then go 4 to 6 hours, let them rest 2 hours, and that's how she would race the Iditarod. On her first go around it, that didn't work. In fact, 2 of her dogs got killed. Wasn't her fault though, because a crazed wild moose came from out of nowhere, killed 2 dogs, injured the rest of the team, so she was done. But what she did was, she continued to try that, and she did something that only a handful of people have ever done. And she won it 4 times. She won the Iditarod 4 times with her new method, and now everybody practically uses that new method. And in fact, she was such a special person that the first Saturday in March, now in Alaska, is Susan Butcher Day. She was such a special person. Look, she had all the same information. She knew the facts that everyone else did, but she went ahead and she did something that we can only apply to wisdom. Wisdom. And I think you probably already know this, but I'm going to share it. I believe wisdom is applying good judgment, using common sense, and then maybe most importantly, making good choices. So let's sift through some of the choices that are out there. Well, anybody on Facebook? All right, everybody. Mike, you're not on Facebook?
I'm on Facebook.
You used to be, Sherry.
I used to be, but I'm not anymore.
All right, well, 90% of us are on Facebook, right? If you've been on Facebook, you know that there are all of these pictures of like the Dos Equis man or Willy Wonka, and they have clever little sayings, right? Right? That's one source of wisdom. You know, we could share that again. Oh boy, this is a really good idea. Any Napoleon Dynamite fans? I love Napoleon Dynamite. Clay and I just watched it just not that long ago. Napoleon says to his friend Pedro, man, how do you do it? What is Pedro's big advice? Just follow your heart, right? Just follow your heart. Have you ever heard that before as advice? Here's wisdom. How do I make it in life? Just follow your heart. How well does that work out? No, that's not so good. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. Can't be with the one you love. Well, everyone knew that song. Love the one you're with, right? Yeah. How about some of the diet fads that are out there? I don't really put a lot of stock in that, as you can tell. But I don't put a lot of stock. But I hear that the Atkins guy died, right? So I mean, maybe you've been exposed to cowboy wisdom. Who has seen cowboy wisdom on Facebook? Let me share some of them. This is called cowboy wisdom. Don't squat with your spurs on. That makes sense. Don't sell your mule to buy a plow. Timing has a lot to do with a rain dance. I like this next one. If you really get to thinking you're something of influence, try ordering someone else's dog around. Here's a good one from Cowboy Wisdom. Always drink upstream from the herd. Will Rogers had a couple of wisdom quotes. Why not go out on a limb? That's where the fruit is. And then he says, Carl, you'll like this one. The quickest way to double your money, fold it in half and put it in your back pocket. I was looking into this idea of wisdom, and I read a quote. I don't know who said it, but someone said, I wish common sense were more common. All right. Well, there are all sources to find wisdom. Confucianism, all the way to Dr. Phil. I'm not saying Dr. Phil's dumb, but I'm not saying that's the best source of wisdom. Farmer's Almanac to horoscopes. And then, of course, I should have made a picture and put it on the slide. Even Pals, fast food, what do they have? They have daily advice when you drive through there, right? All right, well, how do we test which is the best wisdom? I'm going to give you 3 or 4 points if you're a note taker. How do I test which is the best source of wisdom? We're looking at the competition. There's a lot of competition out there. But how do I test it? Number one, does it work? Is it just good advice that sounds clever, or does it work? Secondly, does it help others too? Is it too self-centered, or does it help others as well? Next, is it eternal? True wisdom, wisdom that's going to help you, is not short-term. All right? Continuing this idea of how do I test it, is it just a cute, clever saying, or does it really give me skills for building my life? Does it help me live my life better? Is it just funny, or is it valuable? And then finally, does it lead to maturity, or does it only increase in foolishness? So, you can look at Dr. Phil, you can look on Facebook, you can look at Cowboy Wisdom, and there could be bits and pieces of information that are helpful. And I'll share a saying my dad had when I was growing up. Maybe you heard it from your dad as well. Even a broken clock is what?
Right twice a day.
It's right twice a day, right? Even a broken clock is right twice a day. So there could be some useful stuff out there. But what I want to submit is that biblical wisdom is the best. So I want to invite you to open to Proverbs chapter 1. And we're going to look at some of the verses here between verses 20 and 33. So wisdom cries out. And I love this idea in the book of Proverbs. Wisdom is personified. Wisdom is like a woman, according to the book of Proverbs here. She's personified as a woman. And so there's this idea of intellect, this idea of emotion being personified, this idea of relationship. So you have a relationship in mind with the idea of wisdom. So wisdom cries aloud in the street, verse 20. I'm in the English Standard Version. Wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the markets, she raises her voice at the head of a noisy street. Let me time out there for a second. So she cries aloud. It's clearly communicated. She's in the market, so a noisy place. That's the word image in your mind. the market where people are buying and selling, and it's all chaotic. Remember, I said there's a whole host of competing ideas for wisdom out there. At the head of the noisy streets, she cries out. At the entrance of the city gates, she speaks. So, in the midst of all the chaos and the confusion and all the competition, there's wisdom shouting out, and then offers this question. And the question is there, how long do you want to remain in your ignorance? All right? How long, verse 22 says, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long do you want to wait till you gain in maturity? How long do you want to sit around being simple? Why don't you begin to increase your ability to apply wisdom? And so the good news is in verse 23. It's available. If you turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you. When you decide, like the son in the story of the prodigal son, remember in Luke's gospel, he came to his senses. He said, how many of my father's hired hands have more than enough? And he says, I know what I'll do. I'll turn around and I'll go home and I'll apologize. The good news is when I come to my senses and I say, I need more wisdom, I need to start making better choices, I need to become more mature. The good news is it's available, and biblical wisdom, once we're ready for it, will begin to fill in our lives. You may say, well, what if I just choose to postpone that? Well, there are consequences. Look at verse 24. Because I have called out to you, and you refused to listen, you didn't have ears to hear, you weren't willing to listen. Because you refused to listen, have stretched out my hand, and no one has heeded, and because you ignored all my counsel, and would have none of my reproof, I will laugh at your calamity. So calamity, chaos, bad consequences are down the road if we neglect it. Let me drop to the end of the paragraph, because verses 32 and verses 33 have a lot to say. The simple are killed by turning away, and the complacency of fools destroy them. But whoever will listen to me, listen to wisdom, will dwell securely and will be at ease and will be without dread of disaster. So the bottom line for wisdom there, when we're ready to turn to it, it's there. If we'll listen to it, we live a life that's secure. We don't have to worry about the bad consequences of the bad decisions we make because we don't act on wisdom. Think of a time in life. Think of some of your deepest, most painful regrets. Think of the times where we make those biggest mistakes in life. And I guarantee you, 99 times out of 100, the biggest mistakes we make, we would attribute to foolishness. Well, that was foolish of me. If I had it to do over again, what? Do it differently. And I'm acting out of foolishness. I was a fool. Foolishness, the opposite of wisdom. I highly doubt you or I have ever made a really terrible mistake because we didn't know right from wrong. We knew right from wrong. We knew the right things to do, but what was lacking was what? Wisdom. Wisdom's more than knowing right from wrong. It's more than the list of do's and don'ts. I think that wisdom is applying the truth accurately. It's that how-to. That's where the satisfaction of wisdom comes. It's not just that I know right from wrong. It's that now I know how to put that into practice. So let me finish with this idea. Why is biblical wisdom the best? You've got a host of ideas out there. Pedro saying just follow your heart. Cowboy wisdom, don't squat when you're wearing your spurs. Why is biblical wisdom the best? And of course you may say, well, Craig, you have to say that because we're in church. Well, that's not true. I don't have to say biblical wisdom is best because we are in church. 3 or 4 ideas as I was working on this week. I'm trying to think, why is biblical wisdom the best? Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is it stood the test of time. What's the oldest book in the Bible? Job. Yeah. Just because Genesis is at the beginning, that's not the oldest book. Job is the oldest book in the Bible. Job is under the genre of wisdom. It is a book of wisdom. It's not necessarily a book of doctrine. It's not necessarily a book of learning how to worship or other things like that. It's under the category of wisdom literature. Book of Proverbs, as far as we can tell, was probably written around 900 BC. Solomon, that's around the time period he lived. So 900 years before Christ, we're 2,000 years after it, so roughly it's 3,000 years old. Give or take 100 years. It's been around and it's worked all through those years. So the first reason I want to submit to you that you should consider biblical wisdom, it stood the test of time. Secondly, what comes to my mind is it's consistent. When I read biblical wisdom, when I look through Job, when I look through the book of Proverbs, when I look through the book of Ecclesiastes, there's something in there that stays consistent, of following these instructions, of making these right choices, of avoiding these wrong paths. And tied in closely with that idea of consistency, it has the ring of truth. Have you ever read something that's supposed to be good advice, and you read it and you look at, maybe it's a commercial, right? A television advertisement, infomercial night. You know, don't order yet. Wait, there's more. If you order now, we'll double. Right? It's supposed to be good advice. You listen and you say, boy, something sounds off on that. I don't know that I want to trust that. You really mean to tell me if I buy that Stairmaster, I'm going to look like that person, right? There's advice out there that seems good, but it doesn't have the ring of truth. Biblical wisdom has the ring of truth. It's testable. You can test out what it says, and it's solid advice. And then finally, the most important reason why biblical wisdom, I think, is the best is it's God-given. All Scripture is God-breathed. It's profitable for reproof, correction, right? It's profitable for training us into godly people. So the Bible is a rich source of wisdom. And what I want to do over the next few weeks, next probably 4 weeks or so, is help us grow together in applying wisdom. It's no good if it's just out there and I don't really apply it. I want to have a deeper appreciation for it. I want to learn more about it. I want to be transformed. I hope you do as well. But there's something powerful in biblical wisdom as we learn to apply it that will help us to be transformed. I want to leave you with one verse of Scripture, and it's from Luke's Gospel. And it's one that we don't often talk about because it seems kind of complicated. It seems kind of to contradict when we think of God. Luke 2:52. Jesus increased in wisdom, in stature, and in favor with God and man. And he said, wait a minute. He's all-knowing, all-powerful God. Shouldn't he have come as a complete package into this world? Well, take the verse at face value. Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. And if Jesus grew in wisdom, maybe it's time that we do as well.